it's no longer used for dancing, however it is used for special events for the Lieutenant Governor as well as our Victorian teas.
It's quite a bit cooler in there, eh? Than out here.
Yes. They have an event this evening.
Oh, do they?
So
Right.
they've got the air conditioning
That's
running
what I
to...
gotta
The conservatory was originally located where our ballroom is now positioned. And feel free to step inside if you like.
Oh, it's very warm in here.
Yes. So the conservatory is heated solely by the sun refracting through the glass. So even on the coldest days in winter, as long as it's sunny out, it's still a nice temperature in here. And you see this tablecloth to my right here. That tablecloth was originally positioned under the sword case at the back of the room. And the sword case is quite heavy. It takes 2 people to lift the sword case and 1 person to position the tablecloth. So every day the staff would get to work and the tablecloth was mysteriously on the floor. And no one could figure out how it got there. So it's presumed that it was a ghost that was taking the tablecloth and knocking it off the table, as it's unlikely that it just fell off considering the weight of the sword case. And oh, is that our group maybe? And then oh, all good. So the tablecloth has not moved since it has been removed from under the sword case. So whatever sort of being moved the tablecloth, it's much happier over here. So let's step into the library. So this is the library of Sir Amédée Forget. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, the museum is set up to be decorated for the year 1905, which is the first year Saskatchewan became a province. And Amédée Forget was the first Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan. So this is decorated to look like his home and offices. So this, and you would see in the commissionaire's security camera videos, no one would be in the museum and the picture frame would just keep falling over. And with no rhyme or reason, it didn't seem to have any difference if someone was in the room or if someone was not in the room. But it often gave, if someone was in the room, it'd give them quite a start. Hear this loud clapping noise behind them. It's quite an uncomfortable experience.
Yeah.
And once the salesman finally got the hint that, maybe they don't want to talk to me today, they would have the opportunity to leave a calling card, as with any other guest who was unable to relax and unwind and have some conversation about politics and other things that interested them. So some of the activities that took place in this room were smoking. So the majority of the room is designed to kind of hide the fact that they would smoke in here. So the main thing is the wallpaper. As you can see, it's very dark. So that was in theory to hide all the staining.
Smoke.
Yeah, the stain from the smoke. As well as you can see on the backs of the chairs, there's jackets. So men would remove their jackets before entering and then take these jackets and place them on to smoke. In theory, that the smoke would cling to the smoking jackets and rather than their actual clothes, as they didn't want to smell of smoke while leaving. And they were also able to wash their hands in this basin before they left, so the smoke didn't cling to their fingers. And the last thing that was used to prevent the smell of smoke from escaping the billiards room was this wood-burning fireplace.
Oh.
So every room, every part of Government House, as I suppose it's not a lot of rooms, has coal-burning fireplaces aside from the billiards room. The billiards room has a wood-burning fireplace, and the reason being when wood burns, it sucks up the oxygen in the room. So it was designed to suck up the air in the room and shoot it out the chimney so that the smell of smoke didn't linger. Yes. Other activities that would take place in this room, of course, were drinking, billiards, and snuff. So if you look behind you, you can see a horseshoe container on this table to the left. So that was a snuff container. So another way that men would consume tobacco is they would take a bit of snuff and they'd place it on the inside of their hand, and they'd inhale sharply, and it would act as a stimulant. Quite creative. All right. And then my ghost tour or story for this room. One day, there was a member of the Government House Historical Society, so one of our 2 volunteer societies, and she was visiting with her family, including her grandson, for a tour at Government House. And so this particular woman was able to see ghosts. And one day, as they were on their tour, they came into the billiards room, and the grandson immediately was like, "Grandma, who's that man sitting in the chair in the corner?" And everyone was quite shocked because no one else could see the man in the corner. So what's thought to have happened was that the grandma had passed down her ability to see ghosts to her grandson, and the reason that he could see it and not her is that children are more susceptible to perceiving things adults kind of don't let themselves believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Dark in this room, especially after dinner when it was mostly used by the ladies. So, to kind of brighten the place up, the mirror was used for outside light and chandelier light to reflect off of the room, and then thought if the light was coming from a few different angles, it would brighten the place up a bit. Yeah. And then another feature that works to be functional is this table. So this tip table, when needed in use, the maid would bring it over to the couch and she would tilt it to be horizontal rather than vertical. And then the women would be able to use it to play cards, set their teacups down, you name it. And then after they were finished, the maid would bring it back over and tip it upside or right side up, so that when it was not in use, it was out of the way. As Government House would often host balls, and before the ballroom, they would be held in this main area, but the dancers would also spill over into the drawing room. So being able to have the tip table allowed them to have a place to store the furniture that was out of the way but still easy access, so that there would be more room for dancing. And yes, so this is the petticoat mirror I was talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, so women would be able to adjust their skirts to make sure that their petticoat and shoes were not visible. It creeped me out. Room. So at the time, women visiting Government House would be expected to wear corsets during their stay. And corsets, as we now know, are really not good for one's organ system. And often the women would feel like they were about to faint. So servants would escort them up here, and they would rest them on the fainting couch. And the act of laying down on the fainting couch released their diaphragm, which prevented them from fainting. So, I think a simpler solution would be just to not wear a corset, but that wasn't an option at the time, apparently. As women's beauty standards at the time were quite extravagant, meaning that getting dressed for them was quite extravagant as well. So some women would have servants to help them get ready, but if you weren't quite that high society, you would have this get ready kit, which would help you to get ready. So the tool in the middle is a glove stretcher, so you can wedge it in between the fingers of the gloves and pry open the gloves. As you can see, the gloves at the time, the fingers are quite a bit smaller than what outside on the portico. So a maid would bring some steps and they'd be able to walk out through the window and have breakfast on a little platform just outside the window. And lots of people ask, like, oh, did they used to have a railing there? No, they just made sure they didn't fall. So, quite a bit different than today's safety standards, that's for sure. Yes, feel free to take pictures.
My great niece, her name's Elizabeth.
And for him to stay in this room. So we have our second guest bedroom decorated with a few things that would be useful for a man at the time. The first being our mustache cup. So at the time, mustaches would be waxed. So the mustache cup had a guard that would prevent the tea from splashing onto one's mustache, and to prevent the wax from melting off one's face into the teacup, because that would not be very delicious or fashionable. And then we also have this shaving basin, So as you can see, there's an insert to the basin. And so what one would do is they would shave the rest of their facial hair, and the hair would fall into the insert to the basin, and then you'd be able to lift the inside part of the basin, and the hairs would stick to it, and the remaining water in the rest of the basin would be majorly clean.
I need one of those.
They're a pretty cool thing. And again, very beautiful. Always functional and beautiful. And lastly, we have this heat shield. So this heat shield would be useful to those who have mustaches and those who don't, as the purpose of the heat shield was to prevent the coal dust from spreading around the room, as all the rooms upstairs have coal burning fireplaces, and coal is a pretty dusty substance, so to keep the maids from having to scrub the coal dust day in, day out, this would keep it, it would bounce back into the fireplace, and it would also help to disperse the heat around the room a bit.
Chessboard or chess? Yeah.
Okay.
Would make in a year for wages, so.
Yeah.
But since it was a copper bathtub, it was a lovely conductor of heat, so it kept the water nice and warm. As they did have plumbing, but of course the plumbing was not as reliable as ours is today. Another example of this is the flush toilet. So this toilet was, this would have been a flush toilet that they would have had. However, unfortunately, as it was a kind of a new invention, it wasn't necessarily ironed out properly, so if you used it at night, it would wake every single person up in the house. So, as you may have noticed that there's chamber pots under all of the bed. So, yes, they would have had toilets, but they still would have used chamber pots. Yes. All right. So, the next room we'll enter is the master bedroom of the 4 days.
Wow.
Yes. So the Forgés were incredibly busy people. So when they did have a day to themselves, they would typically spend it the entire day up here and with each other's company. As being busy people, they just, when they needed time to relax, they wanted to kind of be alone. So this room was equipped with everything one could need for the day. As you can see, there's an assortment of chairs and couches and tables for them. And they would have had an ensuite bathroom as well. However, the bathroom that we have is actually kind of a reminiscent of the convalescent era, so that's not what the bathroom the Forgés would have had looked like. However, that is where their bathroom would have been.
Oh.
So, as you can see, the faucet and the taps are very shiny. So, that was actually a gift from Queen Elizabeth to Government House to the Lieutenant Governor at the time, because it was thought that giving a rich person more money as a gift did not make sense, because, they've got lots of that, so what's the point? So instead, the idea was to give them something that would symbolize their wealth. Children, as lieutenant governors were very busy, so they didn't necessarily have time to raise their kids themselves. So a governess would be a young lady who was most likely in the process or prospects of marriage, but wasn't married yet herself. So she would come and she would take care of the children, and she would have been a quite highly educated young woman, and she would have been the highest paid servant in the house. So she was to be proficient at tasks that young women at the time were expected to be good at, like sewing.
Mm-hmm.
So not only were they supposed to be educated and great with kids, they were also supposed to be well adept at different crafts. So, as you can see, the children's bedroom connects to the governess's room. They really have no connection to the parents' room. And if they wanted, the children would be able to be shut off completely from the rest of the house and only have access to the governess, if that's what the parents wanted at the time. So this is the night nursery. So in Victorian times, it was very important philosophy that sleeping and waking hours were completely separated. So as soon as the children would wake up, they would move on to the day nursery, and when it was time for bed, they would be ushered into this room and it expected that they'd go immediately to sleep. So, one funny thing about the night nursery that I find is from the ages 0 to 4, children would wear these white smocks to sleep, but once they reached the age of 5, girls would wear this blue night dress that you see in the corner, and boys would either wear a red or a pink one. And I think it's a little silly that, okay, you can only wear one color. But hey, that was the tradition of the time. And I mentioned the Forgets didn't have any children themselves, but they did have a niece named Rita, and Rita would visit from Montreal, and she would often bring her governess with her.
My mom's name is Rita.
Ah! They would have their meals, they would play, they would have their school lessons. They would spend pretty much every single hour they were here awake, aside from 1 hour a day, which they would get to be outside. As heaven forbid any child got a tan, because tans were thought that if you were tanned, that meant you worked outside, and if you were working outside, you were very not wealthy. So they wanted to make sure the children stayed as untanned as possible to prevent anyone from thinking they had to work.
That doll is so creepy.
Yes, I believe there is. I'm not quite familiar with. We got lots of inspiration on the house, but not necessarily on the ghost stories. So I would say.
Yeah.
Oh yes, so this music box. There have been a couple of accountances of it just mysteriously starting playing, and no one knowing how it started because no one was in the museum at the time. So I feel like that could have potentially been the works of a ghost. And then, yes, one